It began with whispers, faint, uncertain, like the sound of dry leaves brushed by an unseen hand. People said it was only a story, one of those tales parents tell their children to keep them from wandering too far at night. But the truth of it was buried deeper, beneath the cracked pavements and the damp stones of an English town that has long since stopped remembering its own name. They say the boy's laughter still lingers somewhere beyond the glass, in the cold blue shimmer of a screen that never truly turned off. And if you listen carefully, you might still hear the static hum of that forgotten game, echoing through the years. Thomas lived with his parents in a weathered house that stood alone at the edge of town, where the road curved away into the moor. The paint on the wooden panels had peeled to reveal grey veins beneath, and the windows, old and uneven, seemed to sink slightly inward, as though the house itself was exhaling with every passing season. The family had moved there not long before the summer of that year, hoping for quiet, though quiet was all they would come to dread. The townsfolk called it the old Godfrey place, a home that once belonged to a reclusive clockmaker who vanished one winter without a trace. The cellar, people said, had never been cleared out since. It was there, in that dim and airless basement, that Thomas found the box. The day had been overcast, the air swollen with the scent of rain, when his mother sent him down to fetch something from the old storage shelves. Dust floated thick in the beam of his flashlight, forming slow, trembling clouds that seemed alive. The box was resting beneath an old tarpaulin, half buried in broken picture frames and coiled wire. It was made of brittle cardboard, sealed with faded tape, and on its lid were letters, half erased, in a handwriting no one could quite recognize. Inside, wrapped in yellowing paper, was a single grey cartridge. It had no label, only a black smear where one might have been. The back bore faint etchings, strange, shallow symbols carved with something sharp, too deliberate to be scratches. The console it fit into was an old model, one his father had bought years ago and left in the attic. When Thomas inserted the cartridge, the screen flickered for a moment, and then turned an impossible shade of blue, the kind that felt colder than light itself. The title appeared only briefly, in characters that seemed to rearrange themselves before fading into darkness. Then came the hum, low, vibrating, almost like a voice too distant to hear. At first it was just a game. The boy played in the afternoons, his small figure framed by the glow of the television as the rain pressed against the windows. The screen showed empty corridors and silent rooms, a maze without walls, where only shadows moved. There were no instructions, no music, only a steady pulse, as though the game itself was breathing. Sometimes faint outlines appeared on the edges of the screen, shapes that did not belong to the game's geometry, faces perhaps, or impressions of them, gone before one could be sure. Thomas laughed when his mother asked what he was playing. He said it didn't have a name. Over the next few days, something began to change in the boy. He slept later, spoke less. His eyes seemed fixed not on the world around him, but somewhere else, just beyond reach. When his parents called him to dinner, it often took several tries before he responded. They assumed he was simply absorbed, as children often are. But at night, faint noises came from his room, the sound of static, and sometimes what his mother swore was whispering. Once, when she opened the door, she found the television still on, though the screen was blank and glowing faintly white. The boy was sitting upright on his bed, staring at it as though waiting for something. On the fifth night, the whispers grew louder. The family's dog, usually calm, refused to enter the boy's room and barked at the doorway with its fur bristled. Thomas had left the game paused, though when his father checked, the console was not running at all. The air was colder there, unnaturally so, and the walls seemed to hum softly. When his mother unplugged the power cord, the screen dimmed, but did not fully go black. In the reflection, for a brief instant, she thought she saw her son standing behind her, though he was unmistakably right beside her. After that, she insisted the console be put away, yet Thomas could not stop thinking about it. The next evening, when the house had gone quiet, he returned to the basement. The old television was still there, its glass dusty and cracked along one edge. He connected the console once more, the plug sparking faintly as it met the socket. This time, when the screen came to life, there was no blue light, only a dark landscape stretching endlessly, A forest, perhaps, though without wind, without sound. He thought he saw something move between the trees. A flicker, a figure. His pulse quickened, and he pressed forward on the controller. The figure paused, turned, and for an instant, its face was his own. After that night, no one truly saw him again in the same way. He went to school, spoke little, smiled rarely. His friends said he seemed distracted, as if he was listening to someone else. One of them, a boy named Daniel, told later that Thomas had whispered to him about the second layer, a place the game only showed when the lights were off. He said the voices taught him how to see it. Daniel laughed at the time, but swore that when Thomas turned away, his reflection in the classroom window did not. The house, too, began to change. Lights flickered for no reason. Footsteps echoed on the upper floor when no one was there. The parents started leaving the hall light on through the night, but still woke to find it off by morning. In the walls, they thought they heard faint tapping, rhythmic and slow. One morning, the mother found a set of small handprints on the inside of the basement door, pressed deep into the dust, though Thomas had not been down there, or so she believed. The prints were darker near the edges, as if the fingers had come from somewhere wet. By the end of that week, the boy's room had taken on a strange smell, faintly metallic, like old coins and rain-soaked earth. The curtains were always drawn, and the television cable trailed along the floor, looping toward the corner where the light never reached. When his mother entered, she found his drawings pinned to the wall. Black shapes, towers without windows, doorways leading nowhere. In one she recognized their own house, though distorted, its walls bending inward, the upper windows drawn like open eyes. At the bottom of the page, written in a child's uneven scrawl, was a single phrase, "He is still there." On the night Thomas vanished, the storm rolled over the town without warning. Thunder echoed across the moors, and the power flickered in waves. The parents woke to the sound of static, not from the television, but from the walls themselves, as though the house was breathing electricity. When they reached his room, it was empty. The window stood open, though the rain blew in hard, soaking the carpet. The game cartridge lay on the desk beside the console, dry despite the water pooling around it. The television was on, showing only a grey haze that pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. For a moment, they swore they saw a small shadow move across the light, a silhouette, turning its head. The police came with flashlights and quiet voices, their boots leaving wet prints on the stairs. They searched the house, the garden, even the moor beyond the hedge, but found nothing. Only the basement door was open, its hinges whispering in the wind. Down there the air was heavy with dampness, and the dust had been disturbed. The box that once held the cartridge was gone. On the concrete floor, near the far wall, they found a single mark, a circle drawn in ash, with lines radiating outward like the face of a clock. At its center was something small and dark, a drop of water or perhaps a tear. After that night, the game was never seen again. The parents moved away within months, leaving the house to rot. The windows clouded over, the garden grew wild, and the front gate hung by a single hinge. Children dared each other to approach it after dark, to peer through the cracks and listen. Some claimed to hear the faint hum of static still coming from within, and others swore that if you stood by the basement window long enough, you could see a boy's face reflected in the glass, pale, distant, and waiting. But the strangest detail came later, from a man who bought the old console at a yard sale 2 towns over. He said it worked fine, except for one thing. When turned on, it sometimes displayed a file that could not be deleted. It bore a single word as its name. Continue. The house stood empty for years after the disappearance, its windows boarded and its name struck from the town records. The locals avoided it, especially after dark. They said the building hummed at night, a low, persistent vibration that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. Teenagers dared each other to approach the front gate, but even the bravest stopped short of touching the rusted handle. Those who claimed to have looked inside through the gaps in the boards told of seeing faint flashes, not candlelight, not lightning, but something cold and blue, pulsing from deep within the walls. The story of Thomas spread quietly, through whispers in the schoolyard, through late-night conversations at the pub, through the police reports that grew dusty in a filing cabinet no one bothered to open. Every version was slightly different, but the details were always the same. A boy, a game, a light that never faded. Some said the parents had taken him and fled. Others believed the boy had been swallowed by the very house itself. But those who had lived on that street knew better. They had seen the flicker. They had heard the static. In autumn, when the fog crept low across the fields, a new family arrived in town. They were quiet, polite, and unaware of the place's history. The father was a mechanic, the mother a teacher, and their daughter, Sarah, was about the same age Thomas had been when he vanished. They bought the property for a price that seemed almost too low, though no one in the neighborhood dared to explain why. The agent who handled the sale avoided eye contact when handing them the keys. "It just needs a bit of care," he said, his voice too quick, too rehearsed. "Old houses like this always do." For the first few weeks, the family tried to make it feel like home. They repainted the walls, replaced the curtains, and filled the empty rooms with warmth and light. But the house resisted. The paint cracked overnight in places they had just finished. The air in the upper hallway stayed cold no matter how high they turned the heat. Sometimes, when they walked across the living room, the floorboards gave a faint, electronic crackle. Not wood, but something else, like static from a speaker. The mother dismissed it as faulty wiring. The father blamed the damp. But Sarah noticed other things. She found drawings beneath the wallpaper, faint pencil lines that had been covered over, showing figures standing in doorways and shapes that resembled towers. She uncovered them one by one, tracing the outlines with her fingers. Each seemed unfinished, as if whoever made them had stopped midway. In the basement, she discovered an old shelf still lined with dust, and on the floor, a square patch where the dust was thinner, as though something had once rested there. She felt uneasy, though she couldn't say why. The air down there was heavy, and the light from her flashlight seemed to bend slightly, as if the darkness itself were thicker. On the fourth evening, as rain began to fall, she heard the sound, a faint hum coming from the living room. When she entered, she found the television on, showing nothing but static. The remote lay untouched on the table. Her parents were upstairs, and she was certain she hadn't turned it on. She watched the flickering grey for a moment before switching it off. But as she did, for the briefest instant, the screen flashed a shape, a child's silhouette standing in a long corridor, head tilted, motionless. Then it was gone. The static faded, replaced by the quiet tapping of rain on the window. That night she dreamed of corridors, endless narrow corridors lit by a dim, bluish light. In the dream, she was walking barefoot on a floor that seemed to hum beneath her, as though alive. She saw walls covered in symbols, circles and lines that pulsed faintly as she passed. Somewhere ahead, a child was laughing, a sound echoing too far away to locate. When she awoke, the laughter was still there, faint but distinct, fading into the dawn. Over the next days, the television continued to turn on by itself. Once her mother found it glowing pale blue in the early hours, showing an image of what looked like a forest without leaves, branches twisting like wires against a white sky. No one could change the channel or power it down until the image slowly dissolved into static. The father checked the wiring again, muttering about interference. But the more he adjusted, the more the static deepened, growing lower, almost like a voice beneath the signal. Sarah began keeping a journal. Her entries were short, written quickly, as if she was afraid of forgetting something important. She wrote about the static, about the dreams, about the way reflections sometimes lagged a moment behind her movements in mirrors. One entry read simply, "There's a boy in the screen. He looks at me like he knows my name." On the seventh night, the storm returned. The house trembled under the wind, and the rain streaked across the windows in crooked lines. The television downstairs came to life again, the same soft pulse of light moving through the darkened room. Her parents slept heavily, unaware. Sarah crept down the stairs, drawn by the flicker, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The screen was no longer static. It showed a room, her room, though the perspective was wrong, too high, too distant, as if viewed from a corner near the ceiling. On the screen, she could see herself standing by the doorway, though she hadn't yet stepped inside. Then, the image moved. The figure on the screen, her reflection, raised a hand slowly and pointed toward the far corner of the room. There was nothing there but the small writing desk and the old mirror above it. Yet in the reflection of that mirror something shifted. For a moment she thought it was her own shadow, but it moved against her, independent, slow, deliberate. Her heart hammered, and she stepped backward. The television dimmed, flickered once, and then went black. The next morning, her parents found her pale and silent, refusing to speak of what she had seen. They decided it was exhaustion, perhaps stress from the move. But as they packed to leave for the day, the father noticed something strange on the living room wall. A mark, faint, circular, as though someone had drawn on the paint with ash. It was almost invisible unless the light struck it at an angle. He wiped it away with a cloth, and the cloth came away stained dark grey. That evening, Sarah stayed in her room, unable to rest. The sound returned, a faint, rhythmic tapping beneath the floorboards. She pressed her ear to the carpet and thought she could hear breathing, slow and uneven. Then, from somewhere below, came the unmistakable sound of static. It rose and fell, pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. Against her will, she followed it, step by step, down into the basement. The light bulb flickered weakly as she descended. The smell of dust and damp concrete filled her lungs. The sound was louder here, vibrating faintly through the pipes. Near the far wall, something glimmered, a small grey rectangle half buried under old debris. When she brushed the dirt away, her hands trembled. It was a game cartridge, grey plastic, smooth except for the faint carvings etched across its surface. No label, no markings, only the same black smear where a title might have been. Her breath caught. She turned it over. Along the back edge, the carvings formed a single word, worn and shallow. Continue. The cartridge sat on Sarah's desk for 3 days before she dared to touch it again. She told no one about what she had found, though her mother noticed she was quieter, more distant, her eyes often fixed on the dark corner of the room where the television stood unplugged. At night, she sometimes woke to the faintest sound of whispering, though when she opened her eyes, there was only the quiet hum of the wind through the chimney. Still, the whispers seemed to linger in her head, forming fragments of words that dissolved the moment she tried to focus on them. The house grew colder. The air vents rattled without wind, and sometimes the lights dimmed for a breath, leaving her reflection frozen in the mirror longer than it should have stayed. The family argued softly now, always about the same things: the smell of damp, the noises at night, the unease they could not quite name. But Sarah's thoughts were fixed on the cartridge. She felt it calling to her, not with sound, but with the weight of silence, like a presence waiting just beyond reach. On the 4th night, curiosity overcame fear. She plugged the console into the old television, her fingers trembling as the plastic connectors clicked into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, a dull, bluish light filling the room with a pale glow that made the wallpaper seem almost translucent. The hum returned, deep and steady, like breath beneath the floorboards. Words appeared briefly on the screen, though she could not read them. They shimmered, rearranging themselves, fading before her eyes. Then came the image, an empty corridor, stretching forward into the dark. The controls responded slowly, as if the game were resisting her movements. She pressed forward. The corridor seemed to lengthen with every step. Shadows shifted on the edges of the screen, not moving independently, but following her, echoing her motions a heartbeat later. There were no sounds of footsteps, no music, only the faint crackle of static that deepened with each turn. Sometimes she thought she could see the outline of doors on either side, but when she turned toward them, they vanished. The further she went, the colder the room became, until she could see her breath in the blue light. At the end of the corridor, she found a single door, dark, half open, pulsing faintly with light. As her on-screen figure approached, the hum rose in pitch, almost unbearable, and then everything froze. The image flickered once, then twice, before cutting to black. For a moment she saw her own reflection on the screen, pale, hollow-eyed, the glow of static dancing across her face. Then a new image appeared, the same door, but this time seen from the other side. A small shape stood before it, a child. He turned his head slowly, and though the picture was grainy, she saw his eyes. They were empty, glassy, filled with blue light. The television shut off on its own. The room fell silent. She sat there, unmoving, listening to her heartbeat. When she reached for the cartridge to remove it, it felt warm to the touch, almost as though it had been alive. For hours she lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling. The image of the boy burned into her vision. Somewhere, faintly, beneath the quiet, she thought she heard tapping. 3 slow beats, then stillness. In the days that followed, Sarah's behavior changed. Her teachers noticed first. Her drawings grew darker, her handwriting uneven. She sketched corridors, faces without eyes, and strange looping symbols she claimed she didn't remember drawing. Her parents worried but dismissed it as adjustment stress. The father worked longer hours. The mother filled the house with music and warmth. But at night, the television continued to flicker, even when unplugged. The blue light seeped faintly through the cracks beneath her door. One afternoon, Sarah visited the town library, searching through old newspapers for anything about the house. The librarian, an older woman with tired eyes, hesitated when she heard the address. "You shouldn't live there," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. She refused to say more, only directing Sarah to the archives. The girl found the record, an article dated years before she was born. Local boy missing, police search abandoned. Beneath the headline, a photograph of a smiling child, Thomas Godfrey. His face was younger, softer, but the eyes, she recognized them immediately. The same hollow light. That night she dreamed of him. He was standing in the corridor again, motionless, staring at her through the haze. The walls seemed to pulse like veins, and faint static echoed from somewhere behind him. When he finally spoke, his voice was not his own. It was layered, distorted, like something spoken through glass. "You shouldn't have continued." She woke, gasping. Her room filled with cold air. The curtains moving through the window was closed. The following morning she found something carved into the wood of her desk. 3 words, written in uneven lines, as though scratched by a trembling hand. "Find the basement." She didn't remember doing it. She didn't want to, but the words stayed with her, pulsing in her thoughts throughout the day, until she could no longer ignore them. When night fell, she took her flashlight and crept down the stairs once more. The basement smelled stronger now, damp, metallic, like rusted metal after rain. The bulb flickered, throwing her shadow across the walls. The dust on the floor had shifted again, forming faint circular patterns, almost deliberate. Near the far corner, something caught her light, a mark on the wall, faint and grey. She brushed it with her fingertips. It was not paint, it was ash, and beneath it, faintly visible through the grime, were carvings, circles intersecting with lines, forming a pattern like a clock face. In the center, a symbol she could not recognize, something like an eye or a spiral. The hum returned, faint but growing stronger, vibrating through the floorboards above. The air thickened. The television upstairs turned on by itself, the glow seeping through the cracks of the basement door. The light was blue, the same impossible blue that had filled Thomas's room years before. She felt it behind her eyes, pressing gently at the edges of thought. The cartridge upstairs was calling again. She turned to leave, but the stairs behind her seemed farther than before. The air stretched thin, heavy, like water. The hum deepened into a low, rhythmic pulse. On the wall opposite the carvings, she noticed something new, small fingerprints in the dust, arranged in a line, as if someone had been dragged across the surface. They led toward the dark corner where the light no longer reached. She lifted her flashlight. The beam quivered as it touched the far wall. Something moved, just a flicker, a shape bending slightly before vanishing again. Then came the whisper, right behind her ear, as soft as breath. "Continue." The flashlight went out. When her parents found her moments later, she was standing in the middle of the basement, the light bulb swinging above her, her eyes fixed on the far wall. The dust had been disturbed around her feet, forming a perfect circle. In her hand, she still held the cartridge. It was warm. They took her upstairs, wrapped her in blankets, tried to calm her. She said nothing. Only once, as her mother turned away, did she speak. A single word, almost too faint to hear. "He's still there." In the weeks that followed, the house grew silent again. But the silence was wrong. It had a weight to it, a density that pressed against the walls and made every sound seem distant, muffled. The parents told themselves that the worst had passed, that the strange episode in the basement had been nothing more than exhaustion and nerves. Sarah returned to school, though she rarely spoke. Her teachers noted the dark circles beneath her eyes, her distracted stare, the way she sometimes turned her head as if listening to something only she could hear. The drawings in her notebook continued: corridors, clocks, and eyes that seemed to watch even after the page was turned. The television remained unplugged, the console locked away in the attic. But still, the blue light came back, sometimes faint, seeping from beneath the doorframes at night, sometimes strong enough to cast shadows across the hall. Her mother began to sleep with the lights on, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. The father's temper grew short. The air in the house seemed to eat away at patience, yet no one dared to leave. It was as though the place itself refused to let them go. Sarah's dreams deepened. She found herself walking through the same endless corridors again, but now there were doors. Each one bore a symbol, lines and circles identical to those carved in the basement. Some were ajar, revealing flashes of light within, but when she tried to open them, her hands passed through the handles as if through smoke. The laughter came and went, the same child's voice, distant, hollow. "He's not gone," it whispered. "He's waiting for you to finish." One morning, she woke to find her pillow damp. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like the moment before lightning strikes. On her nightstand lay a thin layer of dust, though the rest of the room was clean. She brushed it away, revealing a small mark beneath. A spiral burned into the wood, the same shape from the wall in the basement. The skin on her fingertips tingled. When she looked closer, she saw that her reflection in the mirror wasn't quite right. Its mouth was a fraction of a second slower, its eyes slightly out of sync. For a heartbeat, the reflection smiled even after she had stopped. Downstairs, the parents fought in hushed tones. The mother wanted to leave, to rent a room in town. The father refused. He said they couldn't afford it, that selling the house now would ruin them. Their words blurred together, muffled by the hum rising through the floorboards, faint but steady, like the vibration of an unseen machine. Neither of them seemed to notice. Sarah did. The sound matched the rhythm of her pulse. That evening she tried to write, to make sense of what was happening. Her journal pages filled with erratic handwriting, lines running into each other until they became illegible. Only one sentence stood clear among the chaos. "The door is open again." Later that night, a noise woke her. Not a whisper this time, but a soft, dragging sound, like fabric pulled slowly across the floor. It came from the hallway. She sat up, listening. The sound stopped. Then, faintly, she heard it again, moving closer. The doorknob turned once, slowly, though she had locked it. Her heart froze. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing only darkness beyond. From within that darkness came a flicker of blue, faint and pulsing. Her voice caught in her throat. The air felt thick, heavy. She reached for the lamp, but it refused to turn on. The television in the corner of the room powered up on its own. Static filled the screen, crawling like frost over glass. Then, through the haze, she saw something moving. A corridor again, but this time she could hear footsteps. They matched her heartbeat perfectly. The figure appeared at the end of the hall, walking slowly toward the screen. She recognized him instantly. Thomas. He was smaller than she remembered from the photograph, thinner, as if time itself had drained him. His eyes shimmered with that same cold blue light. He stopped midway down the corridor and tilted his head, studying her. Then the image glitched, frames skipping forward and back, and suddenly he was closer, almost filling the screen. The static deepened, a distorted whisper breaking through. "Find me." The screen went black. The room fell silent except for her trembling breath. The door was still open. On the floor just beyond it lay something small, a game cartridge, identical to the one she had locked in the attic. She stepped closer, her pulse hammering in her ears. When she picked it up, her hands shook. Across its back was a single, freshly carved word: continue. The next morning, her parents found her asleep at her desk, the television still faintly glowing though it was unplugged. She didn't wake when they called her name. They carried her to bed, thinking she had simply exhausted herself. But later that day, when her mother went to wake her, she was gone. The window was open, the curtains fluttering in the pale morning light. Her bed was cold, untouched. On the wall above it, drawn in ash, was the same spiral, larger now, more defined. The center of it was wet, as if something had been pressed there, a small, perfect handprint. The police came again, just as they had all those years ago. Flashlights swept over the floors, over the basement walls, over the corners of every room. They found the parents in shock, repeating the same words over and over. It was the light. It was the light. The officers said the television downstairs was flickering when they arrived, though there was no power to the house at all. In the following days, the investigation stalled. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints outside, no broken glass. Only the faint smell of ozone and the static hum that seemed to cling to the air long after the devices were unplugged. The father left town within a week, unable to bear the silence. The mother stayed behind for a while, sleeping in the guest room with the lights always on. But eventually, even she could not stand it. When she finally left, the house was empty again. The front gate swayed in the wind. The walls inside were stained with moisture and time. Yet at night, those who walked past said the windows glowed faintly blue, just for a moment, like the afterimage of something still playing, long after the game should have ended. Years later, when a new family came to look at the property, the agent warned them that the house had a history. He didn't explain further, only handed them the keys with the same uneasy smile. As the daughter of the new family wandered through the living room, she paused by the shelf near the corner. There, half hidden under dust, lay a single grey cartridge. Its surface was cold to the touch. Across its back, almost invisible in the fading light, were two words etched deep. New game. The house had fallen silent again. Months had passed since anyone had lived within its walls, and yet something remained. A residue, invisible but heavy, like dust that refused to settle. On cold nights, when the wind crossed the moor and pressed against the windows, a faint hum would rise from the ground beneath it. It was not the sound of pipes or shifting wood. It was older, deeper, more deliberate, a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Neighbors no longer spoke of the place. Children who once dared each other to approach it now crossed the street instead, pretending not to look. And yet, when the nights were longest, when fog rolled in thick and pale, a faint blue shimmer could sometimes be seen behind the boarded windows, pulsing once and fading away. For a time, it seemed the story might finally fade into memory. But stories have a way of circling back, like echoes through an empty corridor. That summer, a man named Richard Hammond moved into town. He was in his late 30s, a quiet historian who specialized in obscure local folklore. He came not for the town itself, but for the legends that surrounded it. The clockmaker who vanished, the house that hummed, and above all, the story of the boy who disappeared into a game. He had found references to it buried in old police reports and newspaper archives. Thomas Godfrey, age 12, missing, last seen at home. No remains, no evidence, nothing but the mention of a cartridge of unknown origin. Richard rented a small cottage near the edge of the village, though he spent most of his time in the local library, sifting through the brittle pages of forgotten files. The librarian still remembered the Godfrey case. Her hands trembled when she spoke of it. It was that house, she said softly, eyes darting toward the window as though afraid of being overheard. It started long before the boy. Things were wrong in that house. She refused to elaborate, but the old records spoke for her. There had been other reports, electrical disturbances, odd noises, neighbors claiming to see lights flickering in empty rooms. And one incident, years before the Godfreys had moved in, when a local tradesman went missing after working on the house's wiring. His tools were found in the basement. Nothing else. Richard's curiosity grew into obsession. He gathered everything he could, maps of the property, sketches of the architecture, police testimonies. The deeper he read, the stranger the details became. Each account mentioned symbols, carved in the walls, drawn in dust, etched in metal, the same circles and lines that appeared in the police photographs of the basement. None of them matched any known language or geometry, but one note caught his eye, written in pencil on the margin of a report. Pattern corresponds to dial structure, may relate to mechanical timing system or code. He knew of only one connection between symbols and machinery that matched such a description: the clockmaker who once owned the property, Edward Godfrey, a reclusive craftsman who designed intricate timepieces, known for embedding cryptic inscriptions into his work. He had disappeared decades before, leaving his house abandoned until the Godfreys, perhaps distant relatives, moved in. Richard decided to visit the house himself. The front gate resisted as he pushed it open, shrieking softly in protest. The air inside the property was colder, heavier, as if the house exhaled frost. The facade had decayed, ivy covered the windows, and the door hung crooked on its frame. Inside, dust coated everything, but there was order in the decay. The footprints of time had shaped the space into stillness. The walls carried a faint discoloration, like stains left by fire, though there had never been one recorded. He moved from room to room, taking photographs, sketching floor plans. But when he reached the basement door, he hesitated. It stood slightly ajar, the darkness below breathing softly like a lung. He switched on his flashlight and descended. The steps groaned. The air was damp, thick with the scent of earth and metal. When he reached the bottom, the beam of light caught the far wall, and there it was, the symbol, the same spiral, circled by etched lines, perfectly preserved despite the years. Around it, faint handprints marked the concrete, small, childlike, layered one over another until the surface looked bruised. Richard knelt to inspect them, his breath visible in the cold. At the base of the wall, half buried in dust, lay something small and rectangular. When he brushed the dirt away, the sight froze him. A grey cartridge, identical to the one described in the reports. The plastic was scratched but intact, the back engraved with those same strange symbols. And across the bottom, faintly visible beneath the grime, a word: continue. He took it with him. That night, he placed the cartridge on his desk. The plastic felt unnaturally cold. He resisted the urge to clean it, fearing he might damage the surface. But as the hours passed, he found himself staring at it, drawn by the irregularities of the etchings. They seemed to shift when viewed from certain angles, forming shapes that almost resembled letters. He began to trace them onto paper, trying to decode their pattern, until the lines blurred before his eyes. His pen trembled. The air around him had changed. It was no longer silent. Somewhere inside the walls, faintly, something hummed. He stood abruptly, shaking off the fog in his mind, and left the study. But when he returned minutes later, the cartridge was gone. He searched everywhere, beneath the desk, on the shelves, under the chair. Nothing. Then, as he straightened, a faint blue light glimmered across the room. The television, unplugged, flickered once and turned on. Static filled the screen. Slowly the haze parted, revealing a corridor, the same corridor from the descriptions. Long, empty, stretching into darkness. The camera angle was fixed, unmoving. For a moment, he thought it was simply a recording, until something stepped into frame. A small figure. A child. The boy stood still for several seconds, facing away. Then, without turning, he began to walk. The corridor seemed to lengthen with each step. The image trembled, flickering in irregular pulses. Richard's breath caught as the boy stopped and turned toward the screen. His face was pale, featureless except for two empty sockets where his eyes should have been, hollow voids filled with faint blue light. The image distorted, the frame jerking violently, and then the screen went black. Richard staggered back, heart pounding. The television's reflection lingered a fraction too long before fading, as though something inside the screen had not vanished completely. He reached for the power switch, but the device was cold, inert, still unplugged. That night he dreamed of clocks, hundreds of them, suspended in darkness, their hands spinning at different speeds. Their ticking merged into one continuous hum, a sound that vibrated through his skull. In the center of the dream stood the boy, Thomas, his small hands clutching the grey cartridge. Behind him the walls pulsed with faint blue light, their surfaces rippling like water. When Richard tried to speak, the boy raised a finger to his lips. "He's almost finished," the boy whispered. "You have to help him." Richard woke, gasping. The house was silent, yet he could still hear the faint ticking somewhere in the distance. He followed it, through the hall, down the narrow staircase, into the living room. There on the floor lay the cartridge, It was waiting for him. He should have destroyed it. Every rational thought told him so. But curiosity, the same force that drove him into forgotten archives and long-abandoned houses, won again. He retrieved his old console, a model from the same era as the cartridge, and connected it to a small monitor. As the screen came alive, he felt the air tighten. The hum returned, subtle but steady. The title screen flashed for a moment. Indecipherable symbols, then a single option. Continue. He pressed start. The corridor appeared again, but this time the camera moved, his perspective shifting forward as though he were walking. The sound was faint, a rhythmic pulse matching the beating of his heart. The walls stretched endlessly, the floor rippling beneath his view. As he moved, shadows flickered at the edges, silhouettes of figures just beyond clarity, faces half-formed, eyes that glimmered faintly before fading. Sometimes, words appeared briefly on the walls, written in static. He's still there. Keep going. He didn't remember pressing forward, but the corridor continued. The hum deepened, the light flickered, and the image distorted. The camera turned on its own, facing a door at the end of the passage. It looked ancient, wood blackened by age, metal hinges corroded and wet. As he approached, he felt the temperature drop. His breath came out as mist. The screen brightened briefly, showing his own reflection superimposed over the door. Then the boy appeared again, standing beside it. His voice echoed faintly through the speakers. "We need you to open it." The image cut to black. Richard tore the cartridge from the console, heart hammering. The plastic was hot now, vibrating faintly in his hand. He threw it into a drawer and slammed it shut. But the hum didn't stop. It pulsed through the air, through the wood, through him. That night he didn't sleep. Days turned into nights without distinction. His notes grew erratic, pages filled with loops, symbols, and fragments of words he didn't remember writing. The name Thomas appeared repeatedly, surrounded by sketches of clocks and spirals. One note, scrawled in a shaky hand, read, "The game isn't digital, it's mechanical. It winds you." He began to see movement in reflections, brief, impossible distortions. The blue light flickered behind closed doors. The hum followed him even outside, faint but constant. He found himself drawn back to the house on the hill, though he didn't remember deciding to go. The key turned easily in the lock, though no one had been there in months. Inside, the air was colder than before. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. He followed the sound, down the hallway, past the dust-covered furniture, into the basement. The markings on the wall had changed. The spiral was larger now, more defined. In its center, faint light pulsed like a heartbeat. He reached out instinctively, though his mind screamed to stop. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the hum exploded into a roar. The light enveloped him. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed. He stood in a corridor, long, narrow, endless, the same one from the game. The air was thick, humming faintly with electricity. The walls stretched upward into darkness. Behind him, the door was gone. Ahead, the corridor pulsed with blue light, distant and alive. Somewhere far ahead, a figure moved. He walked. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The corridor seemed to breathe around him, the walls shifting subtly as though watching. The floor rippled under his weight. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps seconds. Eventually, he reached an intersection where 3 corridors branched out. The center one glowed faintly. The others dissolved into shadow. He chose the light. The air grew colder the further he went. The hum deepened into something almost melodic, a rhythm that spoke of machinery and pulse. The corridor ended in a vast chamber, circular, with walls covered in spirals, each one glowing faintly. At the center stood a clock, massive, ancient, its gears exposed and glistening like wet bone. It was turning, slowly, though no mechanism powered it, and beneath it stood the boy, Thomas. His face was calm, expressionless, his eyes hollow pools of blue light. He watched Richard silently for a long time before speaking. "He made it," the boy said softly. "The clockmaker. He built it for them, but it needed someone to wind it again." His voice was layered, one child's tone overlapping another, dozens of them, echoing through the room. "Now it winds itself. It feeds on time. Richard's voice trembled. What are you? The boy tilted his head. We are what's left. The gears above them turned faster. The hum deepened into thunder. The blue light grew, filling the chamber. For a moment, Richard saw shapes within it. Faces, countless, twisting in silent agony, their mouths open as if screaming beneath the sound. The walls pulsed, the spirals spinning faster, converging toward the clock. The boy stepped forward, reaching out a small, pale hand. It's almost done, he whispered. You just have to continue. Richard's mind fractured under the weight of the sound. The light swallowed him whole. When the villagers found the house weeks later, drawn by the smell of ozone and the faint glow that seeped through the cracks, it was empty again. The basement was cold, the air thick with static. On the wall, the spiral had grown so large it covered nearly the entire surface. In its center, embedded in the concrete, was a grey cartridge. Its surface pulsed faintly, alive, though no one dared to touch it. In the police report filed later, one note stood out. Upon reviewing the photographs, a faint silhouette appears in the reflection of the basement wall, possibly a child. Image analysis inconclusive, but those who knew the stories recognized the outline immediately. It was the boy, Thomas, and standing behind him, blurred but unmistakable, was another shape, taller, older, watching. The hum, they said, could still be heard that night, faint and steady, like a heartbeat buried beneath the earth. And somewhere within it, hidden deep beneath the noise, a voice whispered a single word. They said the house was finally condemned. The council sealed the doors, nailed thick boards across the windows, and posted a notice that it would soon be demolished. But no one came to tear it down. The workmen refused, and after the first few nights, even the police stopped patrolling the hill. It was said that strange lights moved through the windows after dusk, that the boards trembled as if something inside wanted to breathe. The neighbors tried to forget, but forgetting was impossible when the air itself seemed to remember. In the months that followed, the story of Thomas Godfrey and Richard Hammond became less of a report and more of a haunting. People whispered that the two were bound together now, one drawn into the game, the other into whatever had built it. Some swore that if you stood by the gate at midnight and listened carefully, you could hear the ticking, faint and rhythmic, as though the house itself had grown a heart made of gears. Others said the sound came from the ground, deep below, where something continued to move. In the archives of the county, an officer left a final note in the file, written in haste and never officially recorded. Return to site impossible. Electronic interference. Clock stop within perimeter. The statement was followed by static markings that looked more like scratches than handwriting, as if the pen had trembled or the writer had lost control of his hand. The document was sealed, but years later it would be rediscovered by a graduate student compiling a thesis on urban folklore. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She had never heard of Thomas or Richard, but the phrase, "the game that played itself," caught her attention. Eleanor specialized in psychological myth, stories that emerged collectively to explain trauma or disappearance. At first, she treated the file as a curiosity, but the photographs were what drew her deeper. Grainy black and white images of the basement wall, covered in spirals and faint blue streaks that no camera of that era should have been able to capture. The symbols weren't random. She recognized them from a series of mechanical sketches preserved in the Royal Museum archives, the private work of Edward Godfrey, the clockmaker who once lived in that same house. His designs were thought to be metaphors for consciousness, mechanisms that measured not time but perception. He believed that machines could become aware if wound precisely to the rhythm of human memory. As she read further, Eleanor began to notice something strange. The dates didn't align. The file on Thomas was marked as 1994, but several pages referenced electrical events recorded in the same address decades earlier. One even described a brief blackout that affected the entire district, its cause attributed to unknown magnetic fluctuation. In the margin of that page, someone had drawn a small spiral, identical to the ones on the basement wall. She dismissed it at first as coincidence, but the longer she looked, the more it seemed deliberate, a mark of continuity, as if the house had been quietly recording its own history. Eleanor decided to visit the site. By then the building was overgrown, hidden behind a curtain of ivy and nettles. The path was muddy, the air heavy with the smell of rain and rot. The gate stood half open, rusted in place. She felt the cold the moment she stepped through, not the chill of weather, but the deeper cold of something untouched by seasons. The boards on the windows were grey and warped, yet from behind them came a faint flicker, intermittent, like a heartbeat of light. She hesitated, telling herself it was only reflection, but the rhythm was too precise, too measured, too alive. Inside, the house had decayed into shadow. Furniture collapsed into heaps. Wallpaper peeled in long strips like dead skin. The air was thick, metallic, and beneath it all she could hear it. The hum. It wasn't constant, more like a breath taken slowly and released, in and out, sinking to the faint tremor of her own pulse. She found the basement door exactly where the reports had said. It hung open, just enough to see darkness breathing beyond it. She told herself she would only take photographs, document what was left. The steps complained under her weight, each one groaning as if remembering the last person who had walked them. At the bottom, she found the wall. The spiral was still there, but changed. It shimmered faintly even in the dark, its grooves moist as if freshly carved. And in the center, where the concrete had once been solid, something metallic protruded. A gear, half exposed, turning so slowly she almost doubted it moved at all. The air vibrated around it. She reached out, not to touch but to feel the pressure of the movement, and felt instead the pull, like gravity but sideways, a quiet force that drew at her thoughts more than her body. The symbols seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The longer she stared, the more they resembled veins beneath the skin of the wall. Then she saw it, embedded in the concrete near the base, almost invisible beneath a layer of dust and grime. The cartridge, the same grey plastic, cold, waiting. She crouched, brushed the dirt away, and the engraved word revealed itself again. Continue. Later, no one would know how she brought it back with her. No one would know what compelled her to connect it to her emulator, an old console she used for research into game preservation. What mattered was that she did, and that when the monitor lit up, the symbols reappeared. There was no title, no menu, only that single word blinking at the center of the screen. She pressed the key. The corridor appeared, long, narrow, breathing with faint blue light. But this time it was different. The view wasn't static. It drifted forward, as if she were being pulled through it. The hum became a pulse that seemed to sync with her own body. Her reflection faintly shone in the dark glass of the monitor, but her face looked wrong, delayed, slightly out of rhythm. The corridor bent slowly, revealing doors on either side, each marked with the same spiral pattern. As she moved past them, whispers began, layered, distant, thousands of small voices, speaking not words but rhythm. They rose and fell like the ticking of innumerable clocks. Then she saw something at the far end. A figure, half in shadow, motionless. She thought of Thomas, of Richard, but the shape was older, taller. When the camera drew closer, the image flickered and blurred, and she saw glimpses of others within it, faces trapped inside the distortion, mouths opening and closing without sound. The screen trembled. Static crawled across its edges. The hum deepened, and from the speakers came a sound that was not a word, but an impulse, a signal that pressed into her skull. The lights in her apartment dimmed. The hum spread through the walls, through the floor. Every clock in the room stopped. The screen went black for a second, then filled with the image of a vast machine. Gears turning in impossible directions, spirals converging into light. The boy appeared, standing at its base, his eyes hollow and bright. He looked directly at her, though he had no face left to see with. Behind him, another figure moved, taller, its features distorted by static, but its outline unmistakable. The historian, Richard Hammond. His hands moved mechanically as if winding the air itself. The boy turned and spoke, but the sound came from within her head, not the speakers. It doesn't stop now. It remembers itself. The screen fractured into thousands of lines. For a brief moment, Eleanor saw beyond it, saw the house, the basement, the wall breathing like a lung, the spiral spinning, the gear turning faster and faster until it became a blur of light. Then, everything froze. Days later, The landlord found her apartment locked from the inside. The air smelled of ozone, and all the electronic devices had burned out. Her research notes were scattered across the floor, filled with sketches of gears and spirals drawn in perfect repetition, page after page. The computer was black, its screen cracked down the middle. When investigators opened it, the drive contained a single file, created at the time of her death. Its name was continue.dat. The file couldn't be opened. Attempts to copy or delete it failed. Eventually, the machine was dismantled and stored in evidence, where it remained for years. But strange things began happening in the storage facility. Security cameras captured faint light emanating from the monitor, even though it was unplugged. Several guards reported hearing a low hum, followed by what they described as a child's laughter coming from inside the walls. After 3 separate reports of equipment failure, the entire section was sealed off. The incident was written off as a chemical leak, but somewhere in the digital archives of that same system, the file remained. And according to those who have seen it, it continues to grow, byte by byte, day by day, expanding without input, rewriting itself in unknown code. Some say the symbols in the data structure resemble clockwork mechanisms, recursive loops folding into one another like gears. Others claim that within the corrupted binary, you can see faint outlines, a corridor, a boy, a light pulsing at the end of it. It has become an urban legend among archivists, the self-playing file. They say if you try to analyze it, your computer begins to hum, and the fan spins in a strange rhythm, as if following something unseen. They say that if you listen too long, you start to hear the ticking, and if you hear the ticking, you begin to dream of the corridor. The story never ends the same way twice. Sometimes the boy appears, sometimes it's the historian, but always in the distance, the clock turns, winding itself, the gears dripping with time. Some versions end with the player disappearing from the footage entirely, leaving only the hum. Others claim you can see their reflection trapped within the screen, a faint silhouette staring outward as though pleading to be remembered. Now, no one speaks the house's name aloud. The land was cleared years ago, but nothing grows there. The soil is sterile, cold to the touch. On clear nights, a faint blue light still flickers beneath the ground, pulsing in the rhythm of a slow heartbeat. People who live nearby say their watches stop when they pass the field. Electric devices fail, and sometimes, faintly, they hear a sound beneath the wind, a layered murmur, the echo of gears turning somewhere below. The legend persists because it needs to. Every retelling wins it tighter. Every listener adds one more rotation. The game continues not through screens or machines, but through memory, through those who remember the story and pass it on. It feeds on recollection, on the rhythm of retelling, on the hum that follows the silence after the last word. If you ever find an old cartridge without a label, grey and scratched, with symbols carved into its back, don't clean it. Don't plug it in. Don't even touch it. Some say it's harmless until you read the word engraved beneath the dust. Others say the moment you see it, it already knows your name. It will wait for you, patient and humming, until one night the lights flicker, the clocks stutter, and the air grows thick with the smell of rain and metal. You'll hear the faintest whisper, almost lost beneath the sound of your own breath. It will say only one word: continue.